Kraljic, as you all know now. I work at Google as a conversation designer. I work on the Google Assistant. And today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some things we've been learning over the past couple of years that hopefully will help you if you are starting to think about adding voice as a touch point for your customers. Let's see if I can have this. Okay, so thanks, Victoria, for the great lead-in. So voice is definitely like out of the early adopter phase. It has not reached the tipping point yet, but about 25% of U.S. adults now have a smart speaker. Many have more than one, actually. They're regular users, so about 70% of people are active users of the smart speaker, and 30% of people are active users of voice in the car. And it's not just in the US, it's in other countries and locales as well. And of course, it's not just smart speakers, but as mics have gotten better, there's now voice on a number of form factors, everything from headphones and watches to like microwaves, for instance. And some of which are very personal form factors and some of which are more communal ones. So it's just something to think about as you're broaching your voice journey. One of the reasons that voice is kind of taking off now is that the technologies that are specific to voice, so the things that make voice work, which is speech recognition on the one hand and natural and TTS, text-to-speech on the other hand, have gotten really good. So this is already a couple years old, this data, but the word error rate, which is our main measure of accuracy for speech recognition systems, is now close to the human word error rate, not in all contexts and not for all speakers, but it's gotten so reliable, actually, that a colleague recently forwarded me an article that was talking about how air traffic controllers are looking at using speech recognition to augment their capabilities. So it's a very reliable technology at this point. And on the other side of that coin is text-to-speech, not natural language generation, but just the ability for machines to actually speak responses out loud, which has also gotten incredibly good in terms of, so there our metrics are usually intelligibility and naturalness. And it's not about mimicking human voice necessarily, right? But it is about that, what I just mentioned, intelligibility, which is especially important. Having worked with enterprises, you guys have a lot of dynamic data, a lot of dates and times and amounts and things like that that used to be very difficult to comprehend when a machine would read out these sentences that included all that kind of data. And now it just is a lot easier to comprehend. So it's really important. Okay, so all of this is just to sort of set the stage that the biggest opportunities and also the biggest challenges in voice UX right now are ones that might be very familiar to you in the chatbot, from the chatbot world as well, which are picking the right use case and making it work very well. And they seem so obvious as almost to not be worth saying, but these are the buckets where when we look at people who are creating actions or embarking on this space, these are the kind of buckets that that we see people making misguided decisions in over and over and over again. And so I just want to do a little bit of a deep dive into some of what we've learned that might be useful here. So one thing that's been really interesting to see is where, now that more and more consumers are actually using voice daily and not just using it when it gets thrown in front of them in like an automated phone system, is that voice fills two needs for people, for users. One is maybe one that you've thought of already, which is that it can be about ease, convenience, accessibility. So when people are hands-free, eyes-free, they're trying to multitask, voice can be very valuable there. And so we sometimes do this test for ourselves when we're thinking about different use cases, which is the tap test, which is how many taps would it take to get the answer to a question or to do a particular task. So if you want to, you can play along by taking out your phone and just seeing how many taps it takes to get the answer to what's 16 times 27. Does anybody want to do it? Okay, well, usually people say it's about like 7 or 8 taps, give or take. Then you've got things that are slightly more complex, play Van Morrison on Spotify. Then you're up to like, in the teens number of taps. Then you have things like any direct flights to Denver this Sunday, which I never actually counted how many taps between like all the typing you have to do and all that. And it's swipes and decisions too. And you can compare that. So I'm going to do this. You should never do a live demo on stage, but I'm going to do one. So just compare that last one, any direct flights to Denver this Sunday, how you would do it with tap versus, if I were to say, let's hope this works. Any direct flights to Denver this Saturday?
Flights from New York to Denver leaving the 25th of May and coming back the 3rd of June start at $243.
Okay, so, whoops. So what it does there, you can't see my phone, is like it sort of answers the question, and also because this is a multimodal form factor, it actually just pulls up the Google Flights UI, and so it's just basically provided a shortcut for me to start browsing flights, which is not an unreasonable thing to do in that case because browsing flights purely through voice would be pretty painful. But taking advantage, like foregrounding the strongest modality that you have, which in this case would be, using voice to shortcut, but then foregrounding the visual modality is a smart decision in that case. So one question you could ask yourself: are you reducing the amount of effort that users have to put in? Another question to ask yourself is: are you allowing users to complete a full journey by voice? And those are two different things, right? So in that one, I didn't complete the journey by voice, but I did start it, and it was a shortcut. One thing that's been really fascinating to me and has been kind of re-inspiring me a little bit lately is that as a society, I think we are, I know we are hearing over and over again that people are looking for ways to not get sucked into their phones and their computers all the time, right? So they're looking for ways for small internet moments to stay small. And voice gives them that. And when you have a smart speaker at home, we see people telling us all the time that, the most surprising thing about it for them has been that not only can they use it together as a family, but also that they can get quick answers and they don't, there's no phone binge. So like for those of you who maybe played along with the phone taps, you very likely still have your phone out and are like now sucked into email or something. 43% of parents actually say that they purchased a smart speaker to reduce screen time. They don't actually even count smart speakers in technology or screen time for their kids. So a lot of people try to reduce technology for their kids, for young kids, but they don't include smart speakers in that because of these other reasons. So it's been really interesting to me to consider the opportunities that voice has for this. But more importantly, maybe for you or in the immediate term, what this means is that when you're looking at use cases that are good for voice, you want to keep those user needs in mind and think about how you can optimize on providing a lightweight, frequent touch point for your customers. And that's the thing that voice is really good for and sticky for right now. So it's not that you want to voiceify your app or website, but you want to look at the range of ways that people interact with your company, and you want to look for those opportunities where where you can make things a little bit easier for them. You want to look for things. These are just like some examples, but think about having the opportunity for a more frequent touch point. That isn't the thing that, when users go to do something that's complex or asynchronous or requires a lot of data comparison, they're probably not going to choose voice as the way to do that. They're probably going to choose to go open their computer or go into a chatbot or something like that. But there are lots of things that people do all the time that aren't that complex, right? And those are the places where you can sort of get wins right now. And we see this in the consumer world as well, right? So the killer apps, and I don't mean to say that like these will always be the killer apps or that they're the most sexy or interesting apps, but the things that are sticky right now are those things that users can complete by voice, where they can sort of like just be sitting at the kitchen table, something pops into their mind, and they just ask for it, and they get the answer to it. So the first part was about, the use case bucket, doing simple things is kind of the message. Look for ways to simplify people's lives. The second part is about how to do those things well. And there's obviously a ton of things to say about that. We've heard some of them today from other speakers. I've just picked a few places where I think you can really have a big impact if you focus on them when you're building your bots. So those areas are the very first use, the very first time a user comes into your app. What do you put in front of them? What mental model do you give them? What obstacles are there? Different things, ways that you can prompt to make it easy for users to talk to you. I'll dive into each one of these in a little bit of detail. What data you can put to use for you and for your users, and investing in the natural language understanding part, which gives you a lot of wins. So this is a drawing of Luke Skywalker that a colleague's son did, mostly because we could get it approved by legal, whereas we couldn't get publicly available photos approved. So the very first time that a user comes into your app, they are going to develop a belief about what it does and what it doesn't do, just as importantly. And if they don't, we heard earlier from someone, it might have been Vittorio actually, about the importance of setting expectations in that first one. This is your opportunity to do that, and it will increase the success with which users use your bot, and also it will decrease kind of the long tail of responses that you get from people, because they'll have a better understanding of how to talk to it. What you don't want to do, if you can avoid it, is have something like, have a user come in, and I see this kind of thing all the time, have a user come in and the first thing they have to do is like, great, go download our app and log in, and then we'll know things about you and we'll be able to give you more value, which may or may not be true, but it doesn't set a good mental model for that user about something being about your bot's capabilities, whether it's learnable, whether it's easy to use, what it actually does, anything like that. And a really good place to do this is in your first prompt. This guidance serves for any prompt that you write, but it's particularly important in the first one. We often see very broad opening prompts, how can I help you? Because we want to show that we can handle a lot of things and it's a smart bot. But besides the fact that we often can't handle all the things that users will say, it also creates a little bit of pressure and deer in the headlights for users. So when users have to speak and formulate their own requests in this very open-ended way, they tend to hesitate for a minute because they're not sure what to say or how to say it. And what that results in, besides their own, the cognitive pressure that they have, it also results in errors because they're likely the mic will time out, or they will say, and you'll recognize that and get a misrec, and you'll have to reprompt. So constraining it a little bit is good. You don't want to go too far in the other direction, which is this other example, which you probably can't read back there, but where you say like, oh, hi, welcome to Yarn Finder. I can give you information about micron measurements, qualitative assessments, and how texture and ply affect results. You can also find out blah, blah, blah. So which one would you like? Obviously, that's too much. So a nice middle ground is to really think about what's the primary thing that that you want your users to be able to do, and guide them along that path. So in this fake example, hi, welcome to Yarn Finder. I can help you get just the right wool for your knitting project. So what are you planning to make? It's a very easy question for people to answer. You'll probably get a lot of I don't knows or I'm not sure, but they'll know what to say and how to respond to that. And they'll also have an idea of what your app is there for and what it can do. And just a little note on these sorts of, I get a lot of pushback. We get a lot of pushback as conversation designers about we don't want to give people menus or things that sound like menus because it's NLU. And we just like to make the point that actually this stuff happens all the time in real life, in real conversation, and it's not seen as not natural or unhuman. It's actually seen as very helpful for someone to know. So again, just sort of like basing things on human-human conversation and sort of verbal storyboarding, you'll see pretty quickly that these are very natural. Context and personalization. 5 minutes, thanks. Okay. Context and personalization. So if you have relevant context and data to bear on your interaction, you will increase every success metric that you want, whether it's a success metric that you're looking at in the interaction itself or a success metric in terms of like larger KPIs and business goals. And that we often talk about personalization as well, you have to really understand the customer that you're talking to, and you want to know about their patterns. That's ideal, but we don't have all that data all the time. You can often do things just based on what you know about customers generally, or how your business works and how people interact with it that you can bring to bear. So for example, when I was working a while back with an airline, we were looking at how to make it easier for people to both tell us what they're calling about, but also if they were calling about a current reservation, for us to collect their reservation number, because that's a really difficult ASR problem. And we discovered that one of the ways that the airline tends to think about the customer life cycle is in this, like, are they pre-reservation? Do they have an upcoming trip? Are they in the middle of a trip? Are they post-trip? And if you just apply that way of thinking to the question that you ask up front, you can ask a much better question that will be easier for users to answer and will be much more relevant to them and will capture a lot more easily what they're calling about than otherwise. So instead of starting with a how can I help you, if you say, are you calling about your trip to San Francisco? If I have an upcoming trip to San Francisco, there's a huge chance that that is the reservation that I'm calling about. And so you can sort of already constrain things based on that. And it doesn't require a lot of data about that person specifically, just requires knowing where they are in this more general customer life cycle. And then the final point is just invest in answering the right question, which means invest in the NLU part, which is a difficult part that you've heard other speakers talk about. When you have a visual interface, you can often understand the kinds of things that users are going to say, but you can often bucket things not as granularly, because when you have a visual interface, you can answer several questions with one card or UI, because it stays on the screen and people can process it as they need to and come back to it. But when you have a verbal response, that's really difficult to do. You wouldn't want to say all of the operating hours for Black Sheep for every day. I've seen plenty of, this happens all the time too. You ask about, like, when is my flight departing? And you get, like, United Airlines Flight 173 departs New York JFK, like a whole bunch of information. And because the speech signal is serial and ephemeral, it's a lot of processing power to sit there and parse through all the stuff that's completely irrelevant to you to get to the one piece of information you do need. And so instead of bucketing all of these, in this example, the questions around opening hours into a single intent, when you're doing a verbal bot, you want to both get more granular in the intent, and then you also want to look at the context, probably, in order to give a really specific answer. So in this case, this is the answer that you get right now. Is Black Sheep open now? Actually, it's closed today, but they open tomorrow at 5 p.m., which requires both knowing exactly what the question was and also knowing the context, like today's Thursday, they're going to open in, they're going to be open tomorrow, right? Knowing that today, tomorrow kind of thing. So the message, do simple things and do them well. Lean into convenience, remove obstacles, use your data, your business's data, and do the work to be specific in your answers. And if you want some additional sort of design tips, we have a website, actions.google.com/design. You can go check that out and get in touch with us that way. Thank you.
All right, questions for the audio. Good. Go ahead and shout it as though you're talking to Alexa. Did you get that?
I didn't.
See, that's a problem with voice command. If it's not heard or it's not loud enough, it doesn't work. Can you rephrase it, but speak into the microphone?
All right. Can you comment about the maturity of telephony to the voice bot platform at an enterprise level?
About how they relate to one another, telephony to the
No, how do you connect the people who are calling into the call center?
Yes.
What is the maturity level where we can make that telephony to voice bot platform where the bot platform can take over the conversation and give it back? Are we there at an enterprise level? Is the conversation smoother?
So, I mean, that's been done in the IVR world for a long time, right? In the call centers themselves. In this world, we're still, I think that it's still early days for that kind of thing for enterprises. I'm not sure who does use that kind of thing, but the way that we think about it is that if there's certain information that you want to collect up front or that you would know in order to make a conversation with a human smoother, you just want to make sure that you also pass that data in and pass it in a consumable way so that the person on the other end doesn't have to recreate the entire conversation but can actually leverage that. Did that answer your question? Sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question.
So this would be a good one for a talk over drinks, I think, because it's kind of a weird niche question. I'm with my friend here in the green shirt. He likes to ask questions, and he's got another one for you.
Sure.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on security. One thing that's annoying about IVR, and just kind of a overlap between voice and IVR, is when they don't give you the option to tap, you have to speak into the IVR. What if, and you had mentioned, completing the journey, and if that journey includes like checking out or purchasing, how do you handle PII?
Yeah, good question. So right now, all of the ones that I know of, either you have to be logged into the app, and so you actually complete the journey on the app itself or through some other channel. And I think that's because, in large part, because people still hesitate to use voice bio as the ID and auth, although it's becoming more and more common in all channels. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. It's kind of an industry by industry decision, right? But it's the same problem, you're right, that we've had before.
Okay. Last question to the almost last speaker. Are you ready?
I have like two questions. So the first one is, I know last year Google showcased a pretty impressive case, like basically a bot was able to call a restaurant and reserve a spot. Yeah. And the person was not, I guess, was not able to identify it. Was that a specific case, or is Google rolling out a series of commercial applications related to that? The second question is, I know you mentioned what error rate is pretty low, but somehow when I interact with Alexa, it's still not able to, talk to me or engage with me in a conversational way. So I'm not a voice expert, but what am I missing here? Thank you. So
for your first question, I don't work directly on Duplex, so I can't comment too much on it. There was an announcement at I/O this year about Duplex being extended to web applications for things like car reservations and stuff, so you can check that out and kind of see what the plans are, what the publicly announced plans are there. For your second question, word error rate is just a speech recognition metric. It's not a metric of natural language understanding or of conversation, all of which So natural language understanding is a different underlying technology that has to do with actually understanding the intent of it, of what you're asking for, and then there's the whole dialogue management, like what to do with that. And a lot of those are, even there, the technology for natural language understanding is pretty good, but there's a huge learning curve to doing it well. You need to understand your users, you need to understand data, you need data to come back in. People have mentioned a couple times before, like no bot is perfect when you first launch it because you need that feedback loop in there. So anytime we see that things go wrong, the layperson response is like, it didn't understand me, but when you actually dig in, the problem could be at many, many layers of technology or design. So yeah, it's not, the word error rate is not by no means a metric of successful interactions. It's just a metric of successful recognition.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank her with your hands, please.